Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next lesson in the Su-25T Cadet Series. This time we're going to take a look at taxi, takeoff, trim, coordinated turn and landings. This is much like in the Su-25. There is a very big advantage in the Su-25T, and that is of course the HUD. The HUD gives us many flight parameters and guidance and helps and indications that the Su-25 does not have on its gun sight. First of all, if you take a look here, you can see that I'm very far back. I consider this unrealistic field of view. Head position. I have never ever sat in a Su-25 T cockpit, so I do not know, but I do not believe that this is a realistic view. Therefore, you can go into options, use the zoom in key and the zoom out key. Exactly what those keys are, I cannot tell you because I'm on a Danish keyboard, and often Danish keyboard, British keyboards, and let's say Indian keyboard, the signs are not placed the same, and Eagle Dynamics changes on which key to use. So I can only tell you to use zoom in and zoom out, and I use zoom in slow and zoom out slow, so it's much easier to get the perfect position. For recentering it, I use view center. So my flight view will be something like this, close enough that I can clearly see the squall display and the HUD and my instruments. And as you can see in the Su-25T, the instruments are more compressed in the center, in the field of view. It is much more pleasant to look at, and you can clearly see that they draw on a lot of experience from the Su-25 operations in Afghanistan, doing Operation Exam and Rump or whatever you want to call it. So yes, much more pleasant cockpit. First of all, we turn on our electrical power, and once again make sure that your HSI is static, that does not move anymore. And the way you can make sure that it is correct and you can calibrate your HUD's heading tape or bearing tape is that if you take a look at in the HUD, it says on the bearing tape 3, 4, 7, 8. Take a look at your HSI. 3, 4, 7, 8. Now we know that those two are calibrated. They work independently, but now they're calibrated, and that means if they both show the exact same bearing or heading, and they work independently, the chance of that being a mistake is very small. Of course, we're gonna call up to ATC for
Кабулете, 100-й, запуск.
1-0-0, Кабулете, запуск разрешаю.
and closing canopy. Oops. The keys for the keys for closing canopy, I believe we learned in the startup sequence, but that is canopy open, close. The two lamps right there that is lit up, that means engine start cycle in progress. And those lights that just turned off is hydraulic pressure. And engine I have spooled up, flight control. I'm gonna speak about the theory behind trim and coordinated turn and landing. First of all, I want that window. Trim. What is trim? Trim is a recentering of your flight stick. That means, let's say you are flying. You're flying, and the nose of the aircraft keeps climbing. Instead of you have to keep pressure on the stick, and if you see in the bottom right corner, you can see that little circle is the center of my stick. Right now it is completely centered. Instead of I have to hold that in some awkward positions all the time, I can use the trim buttons. The trim buttons are trim head nose down. Nose down is the trim forward or up. Nose up is the trim backwards or down, and the roll left is left trim, roll right is the right trim. The reason that trimming your nose down is forward is that it is synchronized now with the movement of your flight stick. If you want your nose to point down, you push forward on your flight stick. Therefore, you always has trim nose down as forward. It is much easier to remember and to control, and your brain only has to remember one movement for two functions. So, if I had to move my stick to maintain level flight forward like this, I will quickly get tired of, especially if you're doing 30 minutes flight or even hours of flight. Therefore, you use your trim. I can trim my stick up to that position right now, like that. The most effective way to use trim, if you have your joystick flight stick like that, is slowly, when you move your stick back or releasing it, you push forward on your trim button. When you get to learn your trim, you will have that movement synchronized. So if you look at your stick, you cannot see the stick move because you're trimming forward as much as you're moving backwards. That wasn't a perfect trim, but you get my point. So that is the best way. Many people recenter the joystick and then put the trim, but then you will nose up and then nose down. You need to get back to the altitude you were at and then pull back again, and other trim. That will just make you ballooning all the way through the trim. So release the pressure as much as you are trimming. Some people like to trim 100%. I do not like that, because even the slightest movement will make you change your pitch, and therefore you need to change your trim. I like to trim to 95-97% and then use finger light movement on my flight stick. That way I have constant movement, but only with my fingertips, and literally with my fingertips. It is just very minute movement. That is how I like it. Some people like to trim it 100%. I don't. So that is fly as you like it. Okay, that was trim. Now coordinated turn. Many people, when they need to bank left or right, just stick left and pull back. That is okay movement to do it, but it is not an effective way to do it. If you move left and pull back to make a turn, your tail will drop. It will sag. It will go inside the turn. That means that your airplane will hit the air sideways. It will be sliding kinda through the air. That create drag and resistance, and is therefore uneconomical and or ineffective. The way to raise your tail and know when you are cutting through the air the most direct way is to look at your slip indicator. This little black ball here. If I do a left turn, or if I do any turn, the ball will slip either to the right or to the left. That means I am sliding through my turn. My tail is dragging. How do I know which pedal to push to get my tail up? It is very easy. If the slip indicator is to the right, push the right pedal. If your slip indicator is to the left, push the left pedal. It is very easy. It tells you which pedal to move, and then just move them until the slip indicator is in the center. It does not take very much movement, so don't just yank it. Smooth, controlled movement. That was coordinated turn. Landings. The very best way to land is to have a long, straight approach. The longer approach you can get, the better. At what speed should you touch down at? There exists no fixed speed at which you should touch down at. The reason for that is that the speed at which you should touch down with or at is fully dictated by the platform weight, how much fuel you have on, how many weapons you have on, and the wind. Since we all know that that changes constantly, therefore there are no set touchdown speed. But as a starting point, 250 kilometers per hour is a pretty good touchdown speed. Lower than that if you are light, and heavier, or higher than that if you are heavier. If you come in for landing very slow and she starts to shake, immediately throttle up, because that means that you are about to reach stall speed. Stall speed is the speed at which you lose lift. You just fall out of the air as a rock. More on stall later. Therefore, it is best to have 20 kilometers at least wiggle room above stall speed. When you come in for landing, there's two ways to stop the plane. When you come in for landing, the angle at which you should touch the runway is dictated by these pitted tubes out here in the front. They should be, depending on how far you're sitting behind your screen, 1 or 2 finger widths below your screen. By that I mean, if you take your finger, you lay down your finger in front of you in a stretch arm, the thickness of your finger, the bottom of that finger is where your pitted tube should be below the horizon, roughly. Once again, it also depends on your speed. The higher you go, the flatter you can touch down. But roughly that. But look at those pitted tubes. And since we have a HUD, we can use the angle. And do not forget that the ADI does in no way, shape or form tell you how fast you are climbing or descending. It only tells you relative to the horizon if your nose is pointing up or down. And do not forget that the VVI, vertical velocity indicator, in no way, any shape or form tells you whether or not your nose is pointing up or down. These two instruments does not replace each other, but they contemplate each other. They work in unity. With these two instruments, you can achieve the perfect landing. When I come in for landing, I will aim for a descent speed at around 3 meters per second, 2 or 3 meters per second. And the pitch depends on the wind and my speed once again. And don't forget that there is descent speed and forward speed. Those two speeds are very different, they cannot be compared. So each instrument has its unique area and they cannot be replaced by any of the other instruments. So let's taxi to the runway, take off, trim, make a coordinated turn and land. First of all, we're gonna request taxi to runway.
Руление.
1:00. Кабулете. Разрешаю руление на полосу 7.
Now Kubuletti cleared us to runway 7. I'm sitting here and how do I know which end to taxi to? How do I know which end is runway 7? It is very easy to tell you. Runway 7 should be pronounced runway 07. 07 means that when you're at runway end 07, your nose is pointing bearing 07. 07 or those runway numbers indicates the heading at which you are pointing when at that runway. So let's take a look at our HSI. We know that if we take a look here, 07 is 36. It is that. That is 07. So that is to our right. So we know to be pointing, our nose of the aircraft must be pointing to the right. And for us to be able to do that, we need to go to the left. So we taxi to the left, do a 180, and then our nose is pointing to the right. So that is how you use those runway headings. Also, if you take a look at here, you can see at runway 07. If we take the ruler down here, you can see, whoops, 064. The reason it says 064 or as you see 070 could be due to a magnetic declination. Each area in the world has a deviation from the bearings. So as you saw, it is pointing the correct way. We were cleared to taxi, so we're gonna taxi. Throttle up a bit and then she starts taxi. The speed at which you should taxi is no more than 10 kilometers per hour. The wheelbase on the Su-25T and Su-25 and F-16 is very narrow, so do not turn too fast. Roughly 10 kilometers per hour. And what is 10 kilometers per hour? That is a very fast walking pace, almost running. So right now I'm maybe a bit too fast, but it is going straight ahead. So, and if you want to look professional, always have your nose wheel touch the center line. It looks very good in multiplayer when everyone is following the center line. So we're just gonna do a right turn up here. In these turns, be very gentle on your rudder pedals. The nose wheel is very much alive, especially when we are starting to roll. So. And we're gonna stop, hold short, wheel brakes. And one more thing, for landing, when you come in, you want to use wheel brake on. Please note that it is not a on-off button. You need to hold down the wheel brakes for it to work. As soon as you release the button, you release the brakes. And one more thing for quick braking is dragging shoot. Some call them brake shoot, some call them dragging shoot or drag shoot. Both are correct. It's just like afterburner, reheat and post-heat. It is the exact same thing. That is all technical correct. Then we're gonna call up to request takeoff.
1-0-0. Кабулете. Взлет по готовности. Отход по схеме на 300 по давлению 758,53.
What we're gonna take a look at now is to make sure that it is clear. You don't see any smoke down there. Smoke means someone is throttling up and they're coming down the runway. We all know how good and wonderful and beautiful the DCS World STC is, so I will not comment on that. But that also means that you need to not trust them. Okay, here we are. We are lined up.
1-0-0. Кабулете. Взлет по готовности. Отход по схеме на 300 по давлению 758,53.
Right now we have 3 indicators that tells us we are exactly on runway 07. The first one, the most obvious one, is that it says 07 on that runway. That runway number cannot be untrue, cannot be a mistake. Therefore, the runway number is the authority on runway heading. You can use that to synchronize that with your heading tape on your HUD. It says 07, so we know that the HUD is working and shows correct, and your HSI shows 07. So right now we know that our HUD shows correct and our HSI shows correct, and we are at the correct runway. Also, we got cleared for takeoff. So full brakes, full mill, and release, and then use the rudder pedal to stay on the center line with very smooth, very gentle, very humble rudder pedals. And I forgot, but 1 notch of flaps, and I do not know why I forgot that, but I just did. At this speed, around 250, pull back to 2/3 on the stick, and at 350 flaps up. Some people take off with the full flaps, some people only take off with 1 flaps. The heavier you are, the more flaps you want, because the more lift you need to take off. And gonna relax on the throttle. And as you can see now in the bottom right, on that control indicator, I believe it's called, I need to have a constant forward pressure to maintain level flight. I do not want that, therefore I'm going to use my trim. Almost perfect. I'm using my VVI now to make sure that I'm trimmed perfect, or just within those 95-97%. The rest I move with my fingertips. And don't forget that when you accelerate, your nose go up, therefore you need to trim down. When you decelerate, you need to trim up. It is just like in a car. When you accelerate, you see your nose rising, or technically the rear is dropping. And when you brake, your nose is dropping and your rear is rising. That is the very same thing in aviation. Okay, we are still flying 07. So how do we know how to get back to our runway? Since we maintain 07, we know that we are practically aligned with our runway. If we take a 180 look back, we should see the runway directly behind us. And therefore, the runway will be at 180 degrees behind us. That means that right now we are flying 07. 180 degrees of that is 250. So we now know that we need to make a coordinate turn to 250, or 25 in the heading tape. And as I said, doing a coordinate turn, take a look at the slip ball indicator. I will make a right turn right now. The ball slips to the left. I push a bit of left pedal and pull back. Does not matter if I climb, just a little bit. Bit of rudder. Not pulling back that hard. Bit of rudder. Perfect coordinated turn. And we need to take look at the runway at 250. But we need to remember that we're now off course to the right because we made a right turn. Therefore, we need to get back on course a bit this way. Now let's see where that runway is. There she is. So, because she is a very good glider, I want to slow down early. The earlier, the better. So, throttle all the way back, air brakes out, and air brakes are air brake. You can have a button for air brake off and a button for air brake on, or just one button for air brake. That means that the first press you deploy your air brakes, and the next press on that same button retracts or turns off your air brakes. It is up to you what you want to do. I can see the runway. There it is, yeah. And I do not want to climb too much right now, because that means I need to descend, and descending means that I'm increasing in speed. And I'm trimming. Let's see the runway over there. When I'm at 400 kilometers per hour, I can deploy my gear. That is roughly now deploying my gear, helping to maintain my speed. And yes, the key for the landing gear is you can have one button for gear up and down, or a button for gear down and a button for gear up. That's all up to you. Now I need to deploy my flaps. You have flaps up, that means no flaps. Flaps down, that is combat flaps / maneuver flaps, or first stage flaps, and you have full flaps, flaps landing position. Of course you want your flaps to be in landing position when landing. Do not deploy your flaps too early. I do not use full flaps when I go faster than 350 kilometers per hour. Around 300 kilometers per hour is where I use my flaps. I need to throttle up a bit. There's the runway.
Кабулете, 100-й, возврат.
1-0-0.
You can see that my nose is
Следуйте
pointing
курсом
up.
2-5-0. Удаление 2-5. Давление 758,53. Посадочный 0,7. Занимайте высоту круга.
He said runway
1-0-0.
07. That
Работайте
means
с посадкой.
we need to come in from the other side. That means I retracted my landing gear, throttle up, and now need to retrim. I'm doing a go around. When you overfly the runway like this, feel how the weather is. Is there any turbulence? Are there any wind or anything like that? That's the first radio marker we're going to use in another lesson. But as far as I can see, I want to be out at the beach before I do before I turn around. That will give me plenty of space to turn around, line up, and slow down. And I know that I'm going to do a left turn, pretty fast left turn, and I know that the speed I'm at now, I will lose a lot of that. The tighter you turn, the more speed you lose. And almost a perfect lineup. Slow down, speed at 400, deploy gear, throttle up a bit to maintain lift. Let's say first stage of flaps, she will climb a bit due to the increased lift. Easy off on the throttle, trying to line up, maintain a steady approach. And as you see, my nose is pointing up, but I'm not climbing.
Проверьте выпуск шасси. Посадочный
I need
0,7.
to trim below 350, full flaps, stop shaking. And before I touch down, I'll deploy air brakes. Just at flare position. Remember the positions of the flare attitude. Deploying air brakes. Boop. Keep the stick back. That helps with aerodynamic braking. And avoid using the wheel brakes above 200 kilometers per hour. Now I deploy my brake shoot and see how effective brake they are. Releasing press on the stick, retracting air brakes, retracting our flaps, and you can see
Один
my
ноль
brake
ноль.
shield there, and push
Заруливайте
the
на
brake shield
стоянку.
once more to remove them. And canopy up. So that is it. Let's do a right turn here. Now we learned how to taxi, take off, trim, coordinated turn, go around, and landing. So the next lesson will be navigation. Since the Su-25T has a ACS, automatic control system, I believe it is called in Russian, that is autopilot in the West. It will be a rather long episode because there are both the analog and manual way of navigating, and there is the autopilot navigation. So I may split that up in 2 stages. Yes, I will split that up in 2 stages, in 2 lessons. The first lesson will be the manual one, and the second one will be about the autopilot. So thank you for watching, and I hope you will join me in the next one.